You know, when you pull out your phone, right, and you send like $100 to a friend through your banking app,
Yeah, the little digital transfer.
exactly. There's this illusion of total, surgical precision.
Yeah.
The app gives you that little green check mark, the ledger updates instantly,
Right.
and you just picture this straight, crisp, unbroken line connecting your bank account directly to theirs. It feels, I don't know, entirely closed, entirely clean.
It's a very comforting interface. I mean, we've
Hmm.
basically built an entire global economy
Uh,
on that feeling of visibility, right?
yeah.
The idea that every cent is categorized,
Yeah.
accounted for, and just traveling on this secure digital highway.
But the reality of how money actually moves across borders, especially when you step into the realm of global financial intelligence, it just shatters that illusion pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. The highway doesn't go all the way.
No, it breaks down into like dirt roads and unmapped territories, just massive blind spots.
Yeah.
So today, for this deep dive, we are looking at the hidden plumbing of that global system.
It's a fascinating area.
It really is. We're digging into a wide range of intelligence reports, regulatory updates, foreign affairs briefings to understand how countries actually track this money. Specifically, we're focusing on AUSTRAC's exchange instruments list.
Right.
We're getting into exactly what this list is, who gets to be in the VIP club, who gets locked out, and the incredibly sophisticated ways that transnational criminal organizations exploit the countries operating in the dark.
And honestly, the timing for this deep dive couldn't be more critical. I mean, the entire landscape shifted just 2 days ago.
Yes, August 20th, 2026.
Exactly. When these new, highly stringent anti-money laundering laws came into effect right here in Australia.
Yeah, these new AUSTRAC regulations are completely changing the game. I mean, they've brought the hammer down with strict ID verification rules.
Particularly targeting the cryptocurrency sector, which is huge.
Right, and they're demanding much more aggressive risk assessments for politically exposed persons, or PP.
Which, if you think about it, makes total sense.
Yeah.
A PP is basically someone entrusted with a prominent public function. So a politician, a senior military official, a high-ranking judge.
Right, someone with power.
Exactly. Because of their position and influence, they're just inherently at a higher risk of being involved in bribery or corruption.
So the risk profile is just completely different.
Yeah. If a foreign minister's salary is, say, $100,000 a year, but they're suddenly wiring $5 million through an obscure crypto exchange.
The system needs to flag that immediately.
Right. It has to.
And that flagging system is managed by AUSTRAC, right, the Australian Transaction Reports and Analysis Center. And what fascinates me about AUSTRAC is their dual identity.
Yeah, people often misunderstand what they actually do.
Right, because they aren't just a regulatory body passing out like compliance checklists to local bank managers. They are Australia Aus's specialist financial intelligence unit. They are actively hunting.
They are. And FIU's job isn't just administrative, it's heavily analytical. They take these massive streams of raw financial data, look for anomalies, and they turn that data into actionable intelligence.
To disrupt serious transnational crime.
Exactly. They are looking for human trafficking rings, terror cells, massive drug syndicates, the big stuff.
But to do that, they need data. And the sheer scale of the data they're processing is just, it's hard to wrap your head around.
Oh, it's staggering.
Like even back in 2013, an audit showed AUSTRAC was sitting on over 254 million financial transaction reports.
And that was over a decade ago.
Right. Given the explosion of instant international wire transfers and crypto since then, that database is just growing exponentially.
Yeah, every single cash deposit over $10,000, every international funds transfer, every suspicious matter report,
Yeah.
it all funnels into this centralized brain.
But having a massive database doesn't automatically solve the problem, does it?
No, actually, the sheer volume kind of highlights the core vulnerability of the entire global financial system.
How so?
Well, when a single financial institution, let's say a major bank in Sydney, when they detect suspicious activity, they are essentially looking through a keyhole.
Okay.
They only see a tiny fragment of a much larger operation.
Because criminals aren't stupid. I mean, they don't just walk into one bank with a duffel bag of illicit cash and wire it directly to a cartel boss.
Exactly. They use a technique called layering.
Layering.
Yeah, they intentionally fracture the money. They send it through dozens of disconnected institutions across multiple borders, converting it into different currencies or assets along the way.
So they're just making the trail as confusing as possible.
They are actively trying to sever the paper trail between the illicit source of the money and its ultimate destination.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the sources use this jigsaw puzzle analogy, right?
Yeah, the puzzle analogy is great.
So if financial crime is a giant global jigsaw puzzle, AUSTRAC only holds the Australian pieces. They can see the money enter that bank in Sydney, and they can see the exact moment it leaves the country, bouncing to a server in, I don't know, Eastern Europe or the Caribbean.
Yeah.
But wait, if criminals are moving money across borders at the speed of light, how can AUSTRAC possibly track a transaction once it leaves Australian servers? Because an Australian government agency doesn't have the authority to just demand a look at a private banking ledger in Geneva or Nassau.
No, they don't. And that jurisdictional boundary is the exact friction point criminals rely on.
Right.
Money moves at the speed of light, like you said, but international law enforcement historically moves at the speed of bureaucracy.
Which is very slow.
Painfully slow.
Mm.
So to keep up, FIUs around the world had to adapt. They created an informal network called the Egmont Group.
The Egmont Group.
Yeah, which now includes over 131 financial intelligence units globally.
But an informal network doesn't override a country's sovereign laws. I mean, I can't imagine a Swiss banker just handing over client data because an Australian analyst sent a polite email mentioning the Egmont Group.
You hit the nail on the head. You can't just casually trade citizens' private financial data over a phone call.
Right.
What's fascinating here is that nearly every country has incredibly strict data privacy and sovereignty laws. If a bank employee or even a foreign regulator shares sensitive financial details without absolute legal authorization,
They're in huge trouble.
oh, they aren't just breaking a company policy, they could be committing a federal crime and facing severe prison time. You need a legally binding bridge between those two borders.
Which brings us to the VIP club.
Yeah.
The exchange instruments list.
Exactly.
This is how Australia actually gets those missing pieces of the puzzle. This list is a meticulously maintained registry of formal written agreements between AUSTRAC and foreign jurisdictions.
It is basically the architectural framework of global financial intelligence sharing.
Okay.
And these instruments, they take a few different forms. The most robust and common are memorandums of understanding, or MOUs.
MOUs, right.
But you also have regulatory MOUs, letters of intent, and statements of cooperation. But regardless of the title, the function is the same. They establish a highly specific, mutually agreed upon legal safe harbor.
So it essentially removes the legal jeopardy. It outlines exactly what data can be shared, under what specific circumstances, and how it must be protected once it crosses the border.
Precisely. So if AUSTRAC detects a suspicious transfer heading to Qatar, for example, and they have an MOU with Qatar's FIU, which they actually signed back in 2019,
Right.
the Australian analysts can request intelligence on where that money went next.
And the Qatari official can actually answer them.
Yes, they can provide that data knowing they are fully protected by a bilateral agreement that basically supersedes the general restrictions on data sharing.
And the scale of this network is really impressive. I mean, that Qatar agreement brought Australia's total up to 97 different global jurisdictions.
A massive web.
Yeah, you look at this list and you've got the global heavyweights, obviously. The U.S. is on there through FinCEN. You have China's. The U.K. is heavily integrated with agreements covering their National Crime Agency, the NCA, the Tax Authority, HMRC, and the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA.
Yeah, they have multiple touch points.
But then you also have agreements with smaller, more specialized jurisdictions like the Vatican or Vanuatu.
And establishing those agreements isn't just a one-and-done deal. It requires constant diplomatic and legal maintenance, especially when geopolitical realities shift.
Oh, right, like Brexit.
Yes, exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the sources mention Brexit as a barrier to data sharing for some, but others say it allows the UK to be more creative in battling financial crime.
It was a fascinating debate in the intelligence community.
So how does an MOU bridge that gap? Because when the UK officially left the European Union, it caused a massive headache for data sharing across Europe.
Right, because EU institutions operate under very strict, unified data protection frameworks.
Right, and suddenly the UK is outside that framework.
Yeah.
So some analysts argued Brexit threw a wrench into joint European financial investigations. But on the flip side, others suggested leaving the EU meant the UK wasn't bound by the consensus of 27 other member states anymore.
It's a perfect example of why the exchange instruments list is so vital. When broader political treaties collapse or change, an MOU serves as a targeted, specific lifeline.
Okay, I see.
Even if the UK's relationship with European data laws became complicated post-Brexit, An existing bilateral MOU with Australia remains entirely intact and functional.
Oh, so it just bypasses the drama.
Exactly. It isolates the intelligence sharing relationship from the broader political noise.
Okay, so the MOU list is the illuminated part of the global map. There's the safe zone where the porch lights are on and countries are talking to each other.
Right.
But logic dictates that if there is a VIP club, there is also a group standing outside in the cold. And if I am my transnational criminal syndicate, I am not moving my money through the brightly lit streets.
No, you're looking for the alleys where the streetlights are broken.
Exactly. To find those broken streetlights, we have to turn to the global standard setter for anti-money laundering, which is the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF.
Yeah, and it's important to note, FATF doesn't arrest people. They evaluate countries.
They're the graders.
Right. They look at a nation's legal frameworks, their banking regulations, their enforcement capabilities,
Okay.
and they identify the weak links in the global chain.
And they maintain two very specific lists of these weak links, which they updated just recently on June 19th, 2026.
We'll go with the worst of the worst.
The blacklist.
Yes. Bureaucratically, FATF calls this high-risk jurisdictions subject to a call for action.
That sounds ominous.
It is. Being on the blacklist means FATF has identified massive, systemic, and unaddressed vulnerabilities in a country's financial system.
So they just don't have the safeguards.
Right. Often coupled with a total lack of political will to fix them. Currently, this list includes Iran, Myanmar, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, so North Korea.
And obviously, none of those nations have an intelligence sharing MOU with Australia.
No. They are complete black boxes.
Right. Furthermore, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DF8, also heavily restricts interactions with broadly sanctioned countries like Russia, which, given the geopolitical climate, operates outside the cooperative intelligence network as well.
But the blacklist is relatively small. The much larger, and frankly more complicated area to navigate is the gray list.
The gray list, which is officially known as jurisdictions under increased monitoring.
Right.
As of that recent June update, there are 22 jurisdictions on the gray list. And this list is highly dynamic, right?
Very dynamic. Just in that last session, FATF added Iraq and Bosnia and Herzegovina because they identified strategic deficiencies in how those countries are handling financial crime.
But countries can get off the list too.
Yeah, they removed Algeria and Namibia because those countries successfully completed their agreed-upon action plans to tighten their systems.
So they did their homework.
Basically, yeah. And this is where the intersection of these different lists gets really nuanced. Because you might assume that if a country is on the FATF gray list, they're entirely cut off from the global intelligence network.
Right.
But it's not a perfect overlap.
No, because AUSTRAC actually maintains MOUs with several gray-listed countries. Vietnam, Lebanon, Monaco, and Papua New Guinea are all currently on the FATF gray list, meaning they have known vulnerabilities, but Australia still has a formal legal mechanism to share data and verify intelligence with them.
The porch light might be flickering, but it's still on.
Exactly. But the true blind spots are the countries that are on the gray list but do not have an MOU with Australia.
Yes. Places like Iraq, Bosnia, Syria, Yemen, South Sudan, and Haiti.
Right.
They are flagged globally as high risk for money laundering, and AUSTRAC has no formal back channel to verify the intelligence coming out of them.
It is literally a one-way mirror. Money might flow out, but Australian analysts cannot see where it came from. But let me pause and look at this from the perspective of an everyday Australian business.
Okay.
Say I run a mid-sized accounting firm, or I'm a real estate agent. A potential client comes to me and they want to buy a commercial property.
Sure.
During onboarding, I realize their parent company is based in Monaco, or maybe they have significant operational ties to Papua New Guinea. Since those are FATF gray-listed countries, am I supposed to just play international police and refuse their business? Because if every business did that, wouldn't it just grind global commerce with developing nations to a complete halt?
That is the exact anxiety that ripples through the business community whenever these lists are updated. But it stems from a critical misunderstanding between a sanction and a gray list connection.
How so? Because they sound pretty similar to a layman.
Well, a sanction is a hard, legally enforced stop.
Okay.
If an entity is sanctioned by the UN or the Australian government, like a Russian oligarch or a North Korean state-owned enterprise, dealing with them is a criminal offense. The transaction must be frozen immediately.
Full stop.
Full stop. A gray list connection, however, is not a prohibition. It is simply a risk indicator. It tells you that the financial environment this person operates in is porous.
So I can still sell them the commercial property.
You can, but you cannot treat them like a standard domestic client. A connection to a gray-listed or non-MOU jurisdiction triggers a legal requirement called enhanced due diligence, or EDD.
Okay, let's unpack EDD. What does that actually look like in practice? Because it can't just be asking for a passport and a utility bill.
Far from it.
Yeah.
Standard due diligence verifies identity, right? Proving you are who you say you are.
Right.
Enhanced due diligence requires verifying the source of wealth and the source of funds.
Meaning I don't just need to know your name, I need to know exactly how you made the $10 million you're trying to give me.
Precisely. If the money is coming from a jurisdiction with weak anti-corruption laws, you have to dig deep. Is the client heir's wealth tied to a government contract in that country? Do they have a clear, auditable trail of legitimate business revenue?
That's a lot of paperwork.
It is. Furthermore, bringing on a high-risk client usually requires senior management to personally sign off on the relationship, accepting accountability for the risk.
Wow.
And you must subject their ongoing transactions to much tighter scrutiny. So you don't have to reject the client, but you are required to aggressively manage and document the risk they bring into your firm.
Okay, so we've mapped the terrain. We know the VIP club with the MOUs. We know the heavily sanctioned blacklist. And we know the murky waters of the non-MOU green list.
Right.
So what does this all mean? The most pressing question now is, how do the bad actors actually navigate this map? How do transnational syndicates exploit these specific blind spots to pump dirty money into a highly regulated market like Australia?
They do it with a level of sophistication that frankly mirrors Fortune 500 companies.
Yeah.
The Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, the ACICC, tracks these methodologies very closely. And one of the most prominent threats they've identified is the use of alternative banking services, or ABS, and alternative remittance services, ARS.
Yeah, when I first read how an alternative banking service functions, it honestly sounded like something out of a cyberpunk novel.
It's very high-tech.
It's not a traditional bank with a vault and a teller. It sounds like traditional banks are a toll road with cameras everywhere, but these alternative banking services are like off-road dirt tracks through the woods.
That's a very accurate way to put it. An ABS acts as this slick, overarching digital interface that sits on top of a massive web of traditional bank accounts scattered across the globe.
So it's like a network built on top of the real network.
Exactly. It acts as an abstraction layer. Let's say you are a criminal wanting to move illicit funds from a non-MOU jurisdiction into Australia without triggering AUSTRAC tripwires.
Right.
If you wire it directly, the Australian bank flags the high-risk origin country, asks for enhanced due diligence, and your cover is blown.
So instead, they use the ABS as a digital blender.
That's a perfect analogy. The criminal deposits their dirty money into a local account controlled by the alternative banking service in their region. The ABS pools that money together with funds from thousands of other users, some legitimate, some not.
It's just a massive soup of cash.
Exactly. Then, the ABS uses a completely different account it controls, perhaps one already established within a low-risk country, to pay out the equivalent amount to the criminal's target account in Australia.
Wow. So the Australian bank only sees an incoming transfer from a seemingly legitimate low-risk corporate entity.
Yep.
The original sender, the true recipient, and the ultimate beneficial owner are entirely obscured by the pooling process.
And the ACAC noted that while these alternative banking services are more common internationally than they are natively within Australia, they are a massive vulnerability.
Right, because they intentionally operate outside the cooperative intelligence network.
Exactly. But criminals aren't just building alternative banks, they're actively hijacking legitimate ones.
And this is where it gets incredibly insidious. There was a very specific warning issued by DFE regarding North Korea.
The DPRK is perhaps the most heavily sanctioned nation on Earth. They are entirely cut off from the global financial system.
So to survive and fund their state programs, they basically have to steal access.
They do, and they aren't just hacking servers with brute force. They are using social engineering on everyday Australians.
Yeah, DFE outlined a methodology where North Korean operatives target Australians who hold legitimate established remittance accounts, so accounts designed for sending money overseas.
Right.
The operatives approach the Australian citizen posing as a legitimate international partner for a highly lucrative purported business agreement.
They build trust, establish the fake business premise, and eventually convince the Australian to hand over the login credentials to their remittance account, supposedly to facilitate the business transactions.
And the second they have the login, The trap snaps shut. They
Yeah.
instantly change the passwords, lock the Australian owner out entirely, and take full control of the account.
Now, look at that from AUSTRAC's perspective. When the North Korean operatives start pushing money through that account to evade sanctions and fund the regime, the digital footprint doesn't trace back to Pyongyang.
No, it traces back to an innocent Australian citizen's IP address and verified identity.
It's a state-sponsored identity theft, weaponized for international sanction evasion.
It's terrifying because the initial point of failure wasn't a weak firewall, it was human trust.
Yeah, it's very manipulative.
But even that seems straightforward compared to the most complex mechanism the intelligence reports highlighted, which is trade-based money laundering, or TBML.
Oh, TBML. That is a whole different beast.
Yeah, this exploit uses the sheer scale and complexity of global shipping to hide dirty money.
TBML is arguably the most difficult form of money laundering to detect because it seamlessly blends illicit proceeds with perfectly legitimate global commerce.
Right. We aren't talking about moving briefcases of cash anymore. We are talking about manipulating the invoices of physical goods. Let's walk through how this actually works, because it took me a minute to wrap my head around it. The most famous mechanism is called the black market peso exchange, right?
Yes.
Which originated with the cartels, but the core mechanism is used globally.
Let's break it down step by step. Imagine a transnational syndicate has accumulated $10 million in illicit street cash in the United States.
Okay, so literal stacks of dirty bills.
Right. They need that value transferred to their operatives in a non-MOU jurisdiction, let's say a high-risk country in South America. And they need it converted into the local currency, perfectly clean.
They can't just wire $10 million to South America. It would be flagged immediately.
Exactly. So they go to a corrupt currency broker. The syndicate hands the broker the $10 million in dirty U.S. dollars.
Okay.
The broker now needs a way to move that value across the border under the guise of legitimate trade. So the broker approaches a legitimate business in that South American country. Let's say it's a company that imports heavy agricultural machinery.
A completely legitimate tractor company that has nothing to do with the cartel.
Right, completely innocent. This tractor company needs to buy $10 million worth of tractors from a manufacturer in the U.S. But getting U.S. dollars through their local banking system is expensive, highly taxed, or heavily restricted by their government.
Enter the broker.
The broker says to the South American tractor company, I have 10 million U.S. dollars sitting in the States right now. I will use it to pay the U.S. manufacturer for your tractors. In exchange, once the tractors arrive here, you pay me the equivalent value in clean local currency.
Wow. So the broker uses the dirty street cash in the U.S. to pay the legitimate U.S. tractor manufacturer.
Yep.
The manufacturer doesn't care. They just got paid for their goods. They ship the tractors to South America.
The tractors arrive, the legitimate South American company takes delivery, and they pay the broker in clean, legally obtained local currency.
And the broker takes his cut, hands the rest of the clean local currency to the cartel, and the circle is complete.
$10 million in value crossed the border, entirely bypassing the banking system.
That is wild. AUSTRAC or FinCEN never saw a wire transfer because there wasn't one. The money moved as steel and rubber.
And criminals optimize this even further with over-invoicing and under-invoicing.
Oh, right.
If they want to move value out of Australia, they might set up a shell company in a non-MOU jurisdiction that sells cheap electronics to an Australian front company. The electronics are worth $10,000, but the invoice is written for $1 million.
So the Australian company pays the $1 million, successfully moving $990,000 of illicit wealth out of the country under the guise of paying a legitimate business expense.
And tracking the true market value of millions of individual shipping containers moving across the ocean daily is a logistical impossibility for customs agencies.
Especially when the companies involved are intentionally designed to be untraceable.
Right.
Which brings us to the final piece of the criminal toolkit. Complex offshore business structures facilitated by offshore service providers, or OSPs.
OSPs are specialized firms that excel at regulatory arbitrage. They look at the FATF lists and the MOU lists, and they intentionally set up shop in jurisdictions with incredibly strict corporate secrecy provisions.
Places that absolutely refuse to share data with foreign FIUs.
Exactly. They act as a firewall. A criminal syndicate hires an OSP to create a labyrinth of shell companies and trusts.
And the OSP provides what they call nominee directors, right?
Yes. Nominee directors are basically local individuals who put their names on the company registration paperwork acting as legally binding figureheads while having absolutely no actual control over the company.
So their only job is to be a name on a piece of paper.
The sole purpose is to bury the ultimate beneficial owner, the person who actually controls the money, under so many layers of foreign corporate secrecy that an investigator simply hits a legal dead end.
Okay, so if we take a step back and look at this ecosystem, we have alternative digital banking blenders, state-sponsored identity theft, massive phantom trade networks, and labyrinthine offshore shell companies based in countries that refuse to pick up the phone.
It's quite the list.
It feels overwhelming. How do you police the woods, especially when the woods are located in a sovereign, non-cooperative foreign country?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the brutal reality of international law is that you can't.
You just can't.
No. If a foreign jurisdiction refuses to sign an MOU and refuses to cooperate, AUSTRAC has no authority to force them. They cannot police the foreign woods.
So what's the play?
You have to execute a strategic pivot.
Yeah.
You can't catch them in the woods. You have to heavily police the exact moment they try to leave the woods and merge back onto your legitimate domestic highway.
I see.
You have to police the gatekeepers.
And this is exactly what is happening in Australia right now. This is the massive legislative shift driving those August 2026 updates and leading into what is known as the Tranche 2 AML-CTF reforms.
Yes, the Tranche 2 reforms are monumental.
The government recognized that criminals don't just leave their money in offshore shell companies. Eventually, they want to enjoy their wealth.
Right, they want to buy luxury penthouses in Sydney or invest in legitimate Australian businesses.
And to do that, they need someone on the inside to open the gate.
These gatekeepers are what the intelligence community calls professional facilitators.
Right.
We are talking about real estate agents, lawyers, accountants, and liquidators.
And historically, this has been a massive, glaring loophole in Australian law. Unlike a bank teller, a lawyer or a real estate agent was not legally obligated to submit a suspicious matter report, an SMR, to AUSTRAC if a client walked in with a duffel bag of cash or a murky wire transfer from a shell company in Vanuatu.
And the A6 report states point blank that this exemption made these professions intrinsic enablers of serious financial crime.
But it's crucial to understand that these facilitators are very often used entirely unwittingly, right?
Oh, absolutely. A criminal syndicate isn't necessarily finding a corrupt lawyer. They're finding a busy, trusting lawyer to set up a trust account, or a highly motivated real estate agent eager to close a multi-million-dollar property deal.
High-value commodities are the prime target here because they allow criminals to park immense amounts of wealth in a single transaction with minimal oversight. Real estate is the classic example, but the intelligence reports also heavily highlight precious gems and gold bullion.
Gold is highly attractive because it holds universal value, it is physically dense, and its origin is almost impossible to trace once it's melted down.
Speaking of melting it down, the sources detailed a massive, fascinating domestic case study on this called Operation Notion.
Operation Notion, yes.
This syndicate wasn't just laundering money through gold, they were actively defrauding the tax system in the process. Because investment-grade, pure gold bullion is not subject to the goods and services tax, the GST, in Australia, but scrap gold is.
So the syndicate bought pure, untaxed gold bullion using illicit funds. But to generate even more clean revenue, they physically altered the gold.
They melted it.
They melted it, defaced it, and intentionally made it look like low-grade scrap gold.
They disguised pure gold to look like garbage.
Yeah. They then sold it through complicit dealers as scrap gold, which allowed them to fraudulently claim millions of dollars in GST input tax credits from the Australian government.
That is insane. They were using a physical disguise to steal taxes while simultaneously washing their dirty money.
Cases like Operation Notion are exactly why the Tranche 2 reforms are expanding AUSTRAC's reach.
And the rollout is happening in two major phases, right? March 2026 for businesses that are already somewhat regulated, and a massive, sweeping expansion on July 1st, 2026, targeting these newly regulated sectors, so the lawyers, accountants, and real estate agents.
And the regulatory expectations hitting these professions by July 3 are intense. They can no longer just look the other way.
By law, they must be formally enrolled with AUSTRAC. They must have a comprehensive, written anti-money laundering program tailored to their specific business risks.
So you need to appoint a dedicated compliance officer.
Yep. They must train their staff to spot red flags, and crucially, they must be willing and ready to file suspicious matter reports.
Now, the CEO of AUSTRAC has been very clear in their public messaging regarding this rollout. They understand that bringing entirely new industries under a complex regulatory umbrella is difficult.
Sure.
They have explicitly stated that they do not expect absolute perfection on day one. They will prioritize education and guidance initially.
But, and this is a massive but, they also warned that they will bring the hammer down with severe financial penalties for any business demonstrating willful blindness.
Yes. You cannot intentionally ignore the red flags just to secure a commission. Ignorance is no longer a legal defense.
But let me play devil's advocate here on behalf of the listeners who might actually work in these newly regulated industries.
Okay, go for it.
Let's say I'm a real estate agent running a small boutique agency in a quiet coastal town, or I'm a local accountant whose primary job is just, helping plumbers file their tax returns.
Yep.
Suddenly, the federal government drops this massive compliance manual on my desk. It seems incredibly unfair to ask a local real estate agent or a small-town accountant to act as an international financial spy. Are they really expected to catch a North Korean money laundering syndicate using hijacked remittance accounts?
That is a very valid pushback, and it is the single most common anxiety expressed by newly regulated sectors globally. The burden of compliance is undeniably heavy. But AUSTRAC's counterargument is that they're not asking a local accountant to act as an intelligence operative.
So what are they asking?
They're simply asking them to identify risk in their own backyard.
How so?
The law imposes 6 core obligations: enrollment, establishing an AML program, customer due diligence, ongoing due diligence, reporting, and record keeping. None of those require you to be a spy.
Okay.
If a new client walks into that quiet coastal real estate agency and wants to buy a $5 million beachfront property in cash, and the funds are being wired from a newly formed shell company registered in a non-MOU jurisdiction.
Which is a huge red flag.
Huge red flag. The agent doesn't need to arrest the client. They don't need to launch an investigation into the shell company.
They just need to execute enhanced due diligence. They need to ask the client, where exactly did this money come from?
Exactly. And if the client can't provide a clear, documented answer that makes logical sense, the agent simply refuses the transaction and files a suspicious matter report with AUSTRAC.
You pass the puzzle piece to the people who are the spies.
Precisely. The ultimate goal of Tranche 2 isn't to turn real estate agents into detectives. It is to fundamentally alter the Australian economic ecosystem, making it a hostile environment for illicit funds.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together. This entire landscape we've explored today proves that being well-informed in the modern business world means recognizing that your hyper-local transactions are inextricably linked to a massive, fragile global intelligence web.
Absolutely.
We started with the new AUSTRAC laws tightening the screws domestically. We saw how AUSTRAC relies on the Exchange Instruments List, the MOUs, to build a safe harbor for international data sharing.
We identified the blind spots mapped out by the FATF black and gray lists, and we broke down how syndicates exploit those dark zones using alternative banking, manipulated trade invoices, and offshore secrecy.
And finally, we saw how the Tranche 2 reforms are an attempt to build a firewall at the domestic gate, requiring professionals to use enhanced due diligence as their primary defense mechanism when a puzzle piece is missing.
It's an incredibly complex ecosystem, and while the burden of compliance on local businesses is very real, the cost of failing to secure the system is exponentially higher.
Which brings up a critical perspective shift. When we discuss money laundering, the terminology we use, like illicit proceeds, financial loopholes, regulatory arbitrage, it can make the whole thing feel abstract.
Yeah, it feels like a victimless white-collar crime played out on spreadsheets between banks and regulators.
And that leads me perfectly to the final thought I want to leave our listeners with today. It's a chilling insight that becomes crystal clear when you read deeply into the ACIC intelligence reports, and it fundamentally shatters the idea that money laundering is victimless.
It all comes down to understanding the true motivation of the crime.
Exactly. When a legitimate investor buys a business or a piece of real estate, their primary goal is to generate a profit. They want a return on their investment.
But the primary goal of money laundering is entirely different. The goal is not to make a profit.
No.
The goal is simply to make dirty, unusable money look legitimate so it can be spent without triggering an arrest.
And that changes the entire economic incentive structure of a community. If a transnational syndicate has $20 million in illicit cash, they cannot spend it. It is useless to them.
So they will happily buy up local real estate or invest in a string of local businesses, say a transport company or a restaurant, regardless of the likely returns.
In fact, they will happily operate those businesses at a massive, unsustainable loss.
Because to a criminal syndicate, losing 20 or 30% on a bad business investment isn't a failure. It is simply a tax they are more than willing to pay to successfully wash the other 70%.
Exactly. So I want you to ponder this as you go about your week. If criminal syndicates are quietly buying up real estate in your city, artificially inflating housing prices because they don't care about overpaying, or if they are subsidizing a local business with endless dirty cash, allowing that business to undercut prices and operate at a loss indefinitely.
How can a legitimate, honest business owner possibly compete?
They can't. The math simply doesn't allow it. Money laundering doesn't just hide the violence of transnational crime, it actively distorts our everyday markets. It entirely erodes the level playing field for everyone else.
When you look closely at the financial X-ray, the blind spots aren't just protecting the criminals. They are slowly, quietly bankrupting the honest businesses trying to play by the rules.
A sobering but essential reality to understand. Until next time, keep digging deeper.